Before we continue today's presentation, it's very important that we do an acknowledgement of traditional lands. Royal Roads University acknowledges that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Esquimalt and Songhees ancestors and families. It is with gratitude that we now learn and work here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. Today's session, Living, Learning, and Earning Longer, Insights from Science. I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Charles Krusekopf, he's the MBA program head, and Dr. Kelly Tremblay, PhD. And Charles will be introducing himself and Kelly. Oh, and my name is Imara Angus, and I'm an education advisor.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm Charles Krusekopf. I'm the program head for the MBA program, and I've been helping host several of these Insights for Action webinars. And as Maria mentioned, the past webinars are up on our website if you're interested to see some of the previous speakers. So I'm really excited to welcome my colleague, Kelly Tremblay, who we met through the executive coaching program, and shout out to a few of our fellow executive, now certified executive coaches who just finished the Royal Roads Executive Coaching Graduate Certificate Program. And Kelly and I also connected because she was at the University of Washington, where she taught, and where I went to school and did my PhD at the University of Washington. So we too, I guess these cherry trees in my background here reminds me of the University of Washington campus, if you've been there. But Kelly and I and our classmates in the executive coaching program had a lot of conversations about this topic that we're going to hear about today, about basically, so we'll probably put ourselves in the demographic of people sort of thinking about, okay, we've been in our careers for quite a while now. We're continually changing our careers, changing what we're doing, and continuing to learn and think about how we want to continue doing that as we move on in our careers and in our lives. And so that engendered a lot of conversations. A lot of people in the executive coaching program were thinking about that and using coaching as one possible avenue. So out of those discussions, I said, okay, Kelly, you have a lot of insights that you can give people, and I think our audience would be really interested in that. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you're going to lead us through both the science and some of the interesting opportunities that are available for people as they think about their careers going forward. So, Kelly.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks everybody, and good to see some of my fellow coaches on the camera here. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to explain, first of all, can everyone see this first slide? It's stairways. All of us are taking steps, and sometimes we wonder, where are those steps leading us? And so that's part of today, is to hopefully create some awareness and perhaps a shift in mindset about, questioning, where are we going? What are we doing? Not only tomorrow, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And you'll also notice that whenever I do public speaking, I always turn on captioning. And that's because in my day job I'm an audiologist, and I work with people who in the accessibility field. And now one of the silver linings of COVID has been work from home. And what the functions of looking at speech to text captioning on the bottom, whereas they used to be reserved just for people with hearing loss, now they're mainstream. And so you can use on PowerPoint, or you can use on Zoom, just turn those captioning on. And it turns out to not only help increase accessibility, but it increases inclusion, diversity, and equity too. And even if you don't have hearing loss, having the text at the bottom helps reduce your cognitive load. You'll quickly learn I'm a neuroscientist. And so if you can listen and read the slides and everything, you get two pieces of information going into your brain, and that helps long days on Zoom a little easier. So I practice what I preach, and so that's why you're seeing the captions below. So, okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead with the first slide and tell you, again, remind you what the objectives are for today. We want to talk about the changing demographics associated with longevity and how that affects me, you, all of us, and how those implications are for the job growth and shifting landscapes in the employment sector. I want to review some of the benefits that come with older workers and how to support the aging workforce. And I'm going to couch that in the context of me as a person who's experiencing that and who made decisions to disrupt my career at about 55 and make this change myself. So everything I'm sharing with you is processed through me as an individual, combining my areas of expertise and creating my own new pathway professionally. And I think hopefully by the end of this, you might come away scratching your head going, okay, I'm good. This is good. Or, oh no, I need to make some shifts here. So everything I share with you comes from the perspective, I'm a neuroscientist and I'm a clinician who worked with patients for a number of years in communication neuroscience, so helping people communicate through audiology means, but I'm also a neuroscientist who specializes in aging. And with that, it's a real honor to be on the cutting edge of where science is taking us. And so much of my research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, and I'm currently a panel that judges research grants. So it's nice to see what's coming down the pipeline for the next 5 years, new discoveries, both from surgical or pharmaceutical ways that help promote healthy aging and hearing and communication. And because of this expertise, I was very honored to be part of the World Health Organization and co-author, representing the USA, the new WHO guidelines for integrated care for older people. How can we help promote healthy aging? What are the priority areas we should focus on? And also a contributor to the World Report on Aging and Health. And so from that lens, it gave me the realization that much of what I study and what I'm experiencing is not just affecting me, it's affecting the whole globe and the world, as you'll see. So with that, I was a professor, full professor with tenure for about 20 years at the University of Washington. I'm still an affiliate and adjunct professor. But it says retired there because there was something that happened in my 50s, which you'll soon identify with, where there was just an implosion of stressors. Suddenly, my husband and I, we had 2 parents with dementia, Lewy body dementia, Alzheimer's. I was reading books for work that I ended up identifying because even though I studied aging, it never occurred to me that I would grow old too. And having been teaching the same classes for 20 years, being in the same office, all those years, it occurred to me that if I didn't make a change now, it would be hard to make a change later. And what was really conflicting was how happy I was in my career. And so did it make sense to mix things up? And through a lot of soul searching and some coaching, we wanted to return home to Canada. I prioritized things differently in my 50s. It had to do about my health. It had to do about lifestyle. It had to do with setting me up with a career so I could work as long as I could because I love to work. It's part of my identity. So recognizing that I'm going to live longer, you are going to live longer. Was I going to be in that same office for another 20, 30 years into my 80s? Or did it make sense to make some shifts then? So as part of this growth opportunity, I decided to go to Royal Roads University and take what I loved about being a professor. And there are many things that I love, but one example is mentoring and coaching. So I enrolled in this executive coaching program and just a few weeks ago became officially a certified executive coach. So I can work with people on the topics that we're going to talk about today. So I have a coaching and consulting business, and the mission is to keep people connected and productive as long as we can so that we can live, learn, and earn longer. So that's a long introduction. And I'm sure you all have fabulous stories too that I start putting in the chat room, start getting to know each other, because you're going to have an opportunity to, when one breakout session, to get to know each other a little better. And so just so we have an idea of who you are, and since we're talking about age, it would be good to know what age bracket you fall within, because depending on what age grade you are in, your perspective is going to be a little different. So a poll question should be popping up now. And if everyone can, identify what age range they're in, that would be helpful. And if you're simply ageless, that's okay too. Okay. Okay, so I see we're, we're amongst peers here, many being 50 to 59. And I think it stopped, so I'll move forward. Okay, so a nice range, 30 to about 79. That's great. Okay, so let's talk about what we mean by living longer. We talk about longevity and health. Health itself, it would be, is a whole new area that we could spend years talking about. You can take a degree in gerontology, for example. But we're going to just speak about it in terms of longevity, in terms of the population overall getting older. So what you see here is a map of the world from the World Health Organization. And if you look, the dates are changing from 2015, 2020, 25, 2030, 40. And what I want you to do is focus on the percentage of aged 60 years of older. So look at those dark navy blue spots, the key there, those areas. When it gets to 2015, most of the world is blue. So look at that right now, it's blue. And then you start to see dark navy blotches poking up. And for Canada, a third of the people of the population, 30% or more over 60, is going to happen right about here, 2035. Okay, you can see it's ahead of the United States, meaning the portion of our society who's going to be over 60 is quite significant. And it means with that the operations and the way our society operates is going to be heavily influenced by the proportion of people who are living longer. So this is what we call the silver tsunami or the age wave. And it's not just happening in Canada, it's happening worldwide. So what does this mean? Well, we know from science that the proportion of world's population greater than 60 is going to nearly double, 12% to 20% by the year 2050. And this is such a significant, this is not just a percentage or just a number. The implications it has on everything that we do in society is so great that the United Nations calls it one of the most significant social transformations of the 21st century. Because it affects everything from the labor and financial markets, from the types of goods and services, health and housing, family structures, intergenerational ties. So suddenly seeing advertisements for products or services for older people is going to increase because there's a market there that needs to be met. Whether you have intergenerational housing or houses built that are considered to be age friendly, that don't have a lot of stairs, or think about how real estate is impacted. So all of these things are impacted. It's really important. If we look at Canada, we know that if we define life expectancy, and aging can be defined in many different ways, but let's just use this way that the Stats Canada uses in terms of life expectancy. It's based on the number of years that we can be expected to live based on the current patterns of mortality, what things are affecting us in Canada. So it's not likely to be the same in Ethiopia, where there's a famine, or in parts of Africa where there's AIDS. So for Canada, it's going to be a little different than other countries. But overall, if you think about people who were born in 1920, 1922, so for me, that would be my grandparents, the life expectancy they had was 58 years for men and 60.6 for women. Now, if you fast forward to 2000, 2009, 2011, our human race in Canada experienced a 20-year increase in life expectancy, which is huge, which is profound. And that's not, again, this is Canadian statistics, but we're seeing this same pattern in other developed countries where our basic needs of food safety, food accessibility, and healthcare systems are in place. Today, more than half the babies born today are expected to live to 100 years old. So you can think about just a few years ago, if someone made it to 100, it gets on the news, it's celebrated because it's not common, it's unusual. But you and I are going to live even longer than our parents are. And unless we get, unfortunately, depending on our genetics, if we're prone to cancers or if we get in a car accident or something traumatic like that, but we too can expect to experience an increase in longevity based on what the statistics are suggesting. So what does this mean? It's because we're seeing this profound shift locally and globally that you'll see stories in the popular press about longevity, about various types of new industries, for example. So on the left, you'll see public health initiatives, policy changes, with the WHO being one example about how to really help promote healthy aging by providing information to local governments about age-friendly cities and communities. What do we have to do to support that aging community? Does it mean that button that we press at the crosswalk should give us more time because there's going to be more 80-year-olds crossing the road and more slowly, and they maybe can't make it across in 10 seconds? Does it mean that there should be more public facilities that have reduced stairs, or if community centers are wired for hearing accessibility features, for example? So we're seeing a lot of things show up in our lives. You may not notice it until now. It's heightening your awareness. But you'll also see tons and tons of books being written about longevity and aging. For some people, they want to live longer. But in this case, this book that really affected me, this is what made the decision when I turned 50 of saying, I'm only halfway there. And this is from some colleagues of mine who are both psychologists and economists, and how the 100-year life is going to affect us as individuals, as well as the business communities and the economies. And on the right, I don't expect you to be able to read all this, but there's been an explosion what we call age tech. And you can download this at thegerontologist.com. And these are businesses now that are designed to meet a need that wasn't necessarily there 10 years ago. So everything from support for caregivers, end of life planning, different types of wellness programs and sensory aids and senior living communities. So these are new industries that didn't necessarily exist a decade or so. So getting older requires a mind shift, whereas maybe we would just look to our parents and assume that we were going to retire like them at, say, 55 or 65 and golf or, travel or things like that. Because living longer for us, for where we might think, oh, this is great, we get a few extra years. But living longer requires earning longer. Means we need to provide for ourselves in many years. So how your parents provided for themselves financially in their financial plans may not be sufficient for us. And so if you don't have a financial planner, now's the time to get one. The other part is, if we're going to live longer and need to earn longer, chances are we're going to need to earn longer. In order to earn longer, you may need to learn longer. And that too is a really kind of profound shift when you think, I graduated school, I thought I was done. Do I really need to go back to school? Or, hopefully I've kind of just rattled your brain a little bit to think about, well, what does life look like for me in the next decade or 2 or 3? So we're going to have some fun to start out. We're going to go into a breakout group, and I'm going to ask you, what do you want to be doing at 65 years of age? And if you're one of those people at 30 who's on our call and you haven't even thought about it, then here's a chance. It's important to think about it. If you're already in that age group, great. Here's a chance for you to recalibrate and think, am I on track for where I want to do? So we're going to break out for a short period of time. And don't worry if you're shy about being in breakout groups, you can just stay in this main room and give yourself a few minutes to reflect. But in a minute, you'll be sent out to a breakout group, and we'll come back. Ask yourself, what do you want to do and be doing at 65? And what steps do you need to get there? So I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. So I have assigned everybody into breakout rooms. You should receive an invitation you just need to accept that invitation and you'll go into a breakout room.
Okay, are we all in, Amara?
Everybody is back in the room now.
Yay. Okay. So if you can, we're going to do another poll, but feel free to put in and share with you your ideas of what you think you want to do at 65, or if you still don't know, that's okay too. But we're going to go to a poll that asks, what does 65 look like for you? Does it involve working in your current career, working in a new career, not working, Volunteering, never thought about it until today. So let's work with the poll for a second. Working in a new career, not surprised, especially with this age range. Okay, not working too, that's good. Still seeing some people new in the current career, 84% voting. Okay, that's really insightful. So a lot of people, the majority of people here are in the 50 to 59 range, and what we're seeing is working in a new career. You follow the statistics. This is a very common pattern of results with people looking for changes, but still wanting to contribute in a way that generates income. So clearly there's various ways to work, and how we defined it in this case is either being self-employed or an employer and working for a salary. So let's think about, again, if living longer requires earning longer, and now you are also kind of sorting out what that might look like in the future. Now we need to think about, well, does earning longer, does it necessarily require learning longer? So let's take one step at a time and let's talk about earning longer. What does that look like? Well, as I mentioned to you, you fit the statistics. This is a graph from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, but the statistics aren't any different as for Canada. And if you look at the labor force growth, according to age group, you can see that by 2014 to 2024, there's only going to be a small growth in the number of people entering and looking for jobs in the 25 to 34 range. And then the 35 to 44 year range, there's going to be a negative growth in 45 to 54, probably because people are sticking with their careers. Whatever they found in their 30s, you're probably sticking with it into the 40s. But look what happens when you're 55 and older, even 75 and older. The percentage of number of people who are entering the job force is quite large. And it certainly didn't look like this 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And why might that be? The Pew Research says that the official labor force data shows 29% of boomers were looking for jobs. So between 65 and 62 years of age, people going on the job market. Why is this? Well, you can put your own thoughts in the chat room here, but I can tell you that in our generations, we've had the luxury of working in environments that aren't necessarily hard labor. There's a big white collar industry. So often those jobs are part of our identity. So the idea of not working is not something that is necessarily appealing. It may be that the amount of savings that's required, especially in countries like the US, where you can't necessarily rely on Social Security and things like that to take care of you, you suddenly realize in your 60s that maybe you need additional income, or you want to live a certain lifestyle that you've been accustomed to living, and you really want to continue that lifestyle. And for many people, I don't know if you know the statistics, but the risk factor of depression increases by 40% for men who are not working. So again, having purpose and having something to engage in, and being connected to community is really important. And for many people, that comes through age, through working into older age. So for Statistics Canada, you can look, but that by 2021, this year, 1 in 4 workers are expected to be 55 years plus. And that's quite a change. If you looked at 1996, the ratio of 3 workers of being younger, 25 to 34 versus age 55 is 3 to 1. In 2018, it's 1 to 1. And it's not just in certain occupations. We're seeing this across the board with a lot of occupations. So the workforce is changing. And yet there are still companies that have mandatory retirement at 62 or 65. Or there's still maybe some lack of discussion going on in your company that's assuming that you're going to retire at a set age of 55 and 65. And what might that look like if you wanted to work later? What would that look like? What are your options? And so this too is a statistic that's a survey that responded to how organizations are preparing for the projected increase in older workers. What does the aging workforce look like? And if you look, Many of the companies here are just beginning to examine internal policies and management practice to address the change. A good portion are just not even aware of this potential change. Many have, very few have agreed on a plan to change policies and management practices. So the idea that there's even an awareness within the company and that people are in human resources and through operations have even addressed this is slim to none. And this is one of the reasons why it is a major priority of governments, because the earlier people retire and are dependent on government funding to subsidize themselves, the harder it is on the economy. So I have another polling question. Is your organization openly addressing the aging workforce? Is that something that's even discussed? Do you know your retirement options? So let's just take a quick poll here. No, no. And if you say, I don't know, to me, that's almost as good as no, because it means that it hasn't been brought to awareness, or it's certainly not a priority of the company. So you can see how if this isn't even being discussed, you're going to have many people reaching ages of 50 and 60, feeling like they don't necessarily have a clear path of what their future looks like at the company. So this is important gap that we are experiencing. Fortunately, if you don't know, or your company is not doing anything, there are resources here. So I've put this resource here in the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health. And you can see there's a whole section on aging workers and some questions and answer facts that you should go to. At least you can arm yourself with information and become informed and take that to your human resources person, or just become a self-advocate. You can also look for those people who are in HR. The Society for Human Resource Management is a US-based company, but there's an alliance between the chartered professionals and human resources in Canada as well. And if you go to their website, you'll see all kinds of videos and tools and resources that can help you as an HR person navigate and changing the culture of your company to better understand the aging workforce, or you as an individual to better arm yourself with information on how to navigate your own future. So take a look at these resources. Because the question is, if you need to earn longer, you need to know what's going to be available to you when you are 65, 70, and 75, given that tends to be when people think about it too late and they're out looking for jobs. This is one of the reasons why I chose earlier to step away and let my values drive what I wanted to do for the next 20, 30 years. And that had to do more about lifestyle and family and health, and working differently, but using my resources differently, which is why I'm now a coaching consultant, which is a very common second act for people to do. So, but it means, just like I did, learning longer. How do I equip myself? As much as I am a neuroscientist, I'm a public health person, I'm all of these things. If I want to work in this industry, how do I best prepare? And so this is one of the reasons why I went back and did my certificate at Royal Roads. Because you think about it, if you have a 50-year work life, say you start working at 20 and you end at 50, so much happens in 5 decades. Just look at technology. When I started working, we didn't have computers. And then when we did get computers, it was their floppy drives. And now on a given day with consulting, I've got 3 apps going, and I'm operating between a Rike platform, a Slack program. All kinds of things are happening simultaneously that didn't exist 5 years ago even. Think about health and technology, what's changed in our society. So if you're in nursing, or if you are a health advocate, some professions now exist that didn't even exist a few years ago. The word wellness basically didn't even appear in our vocabulary 10 years ago. Think also about cultural mindsets and philosophies. How we show up at work has changed. And so when you're working in a multi-generational environment, the language and the posturing and how we show up can be very different depending on what generation you belong to. So there's a whole lot of learning that needs to happen if you want to remain engaged and connected in either as an employee or even self-employed. We can also think about the many ways that things that are changing and how we learn. So whether it's in person versus online, COVID, did a major pendulum swing for that. But also there's an increasing commitment to experiential learning and co-op. Because of the aging workforce, we're seeing more tuition benefits for seniors, not only in Canada, but worldwide, and more government-sponsored programs that are available for free tuition if you say you're over 55, and back to work programs for 55 and older. So take a look at those. So let's do a poll question. Given what you thought when you were thinking about 65 and how you might get there, does that plan or path, even though you just thought about it in the last few minutes, does it involve upskilling or reskilling or going back to school? And if so, where do you think that would be most comfortable for you? Through self-study, like readings and joining groups that are have similar causes, or do you want to go to someplace where you get a credit that you're part of, formal training? Or is it hobbies? Hobbies are very enriched experiences and show that they, contribute to a healthy aging, keeping your brain and bodies active. And then, of course, you've earned the right to sit on the couch and with no intention to upskill too, if that's your preference. But it seems to me here from our plan that everybody intends to do some type of learning, and there seems to be a vested interest in something that offers some credentialing and even if it involves some tuition. So that's good to know. Because one of the myths that we often see happen is people often withhold themselves from learning because they get into the stigma or the stereotype that, well, we lose our ability to learn as we get older, and that's simply not true. Let me give you an example. What does the science say? Well, fact or fiction, there is evidence that we do lose some of our brain plasticity as we get older. So two examples I think we can all identify is trying to learn a new language later in life is certainly not as easy as when we were younger, just like learning a music instrument when we're younger. I study this professionally as a neuroscience and looked at, just looking at how quickly the brain can absorb new sounds. And what we found was that the auditory brain responses just don't respond. They don't literally suck it up as quickly and retain it with older listeners versus younger listeners. So this is an example of brain studies that I'm involved in that looked at groups of individuals in different age groups, and you could see as we grow older we lose some of that capacity. But there's so much else that we can do. And so fact or fiction, technology, when we think about boomers and technology, there's science to show that older people do not lack the physical capacities to be able to use individual technology, and older people can understand. So these old wives' tales or these stereotypes have proven to be false. And so if that's the case, there's so much potential that we, as we grow older, still yield. And in fact, I would want to challenge you to think about, what do you think is the average age of a startup founder? Do you think it's, we all think about Zuckerbergs and Facebooks, or are they our neighbor, old elderly neighbor? What do you think? Okay. So most of you are thinking about 40, 49. So that whole Silicon Valley student, genius thing is false. That's a stereotype that just got blown up because of Facebook and everything. The average age is 40 to 49, followed by 50 to 59. And in fact, according to the Harvard Business Review research, the average age of a successful startup is with a 45-year-old. And part of that is accredited to a number of things. But one of them is one of the things that we talk about when we think about science showing that there are benefits that come by employing older workers or being an older worker. And you can learn more about that from the Society, the Human Resource Management website. But one of them up here you can see is crystallized intelligence. When we talk about intelligence as cognitive neuroscientists, we think of it in very different ways. As much as you might think IQ, well, there's different types of intelligence, fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. And, albeit some things go down, maybe our reaction times to be able to remember things as quickly may decline slightly with age. But things like crystallized intelligence, where we can take things from prior experience, from our prior learning, and be able to use that in a constructive way that moves us forward and has creativity to it, and to be able to implement it. And that historical knowledge is something that peaks in our 60 to 70 years of age. So it's not all downhill. Some of the other benefits that come with older workers is lower turnover and emotional maturity, a workplace loyalty, lower absenteeism, and the less need for supervision. So there are many ways, good reasons for you to stay employed if you find that environment that allows you to age well in an employment setting. But as an employer, there's good reasons to work with your employees if they choose to continue to work, to help support them so that you can work around some of the challenges that might be posed, but also ways to capitalize on the strengths that they bring to your company. So I mentioned that there may be some limitations or some things that do decline. And again, I'll refer you to this website to be able to look at some of the accommodations. So some of the limitations we see involve mobility limitations. Surely at 70 years old, if you're working, maybe doing some plumbing underneath the house might not be something that you choose to do, but maybe you work for the same company in the office. Excessively long periods of time standing are other examples. So perhaps restructuring your job where it doesn't involve a lot of standing. This is where I come into play, because by nature, vision and hearing are things that we lose as we age, and that impacts our ability to communicate at work. And whether you're on the floor of a stock exchange, having to, in a really loud environment, trying to make critical transitions in sales, that if you mishear it and you misunderstand it, the cost to your client is huge. Or if you're in surgery and you're wearing masks and you can't hear what the surgeon is saying to you as a nurse, or you're in a boardroom and you can't hear what people are saying, these types of things usually result in early retirement, financial instability, social withdrawal, social isolation, all kinds of things that can spiral. And so this is part of what I do is improving accessibility in the workplace. And many audiologists do as well, working with individuals, trying to give them the tools that they need so that they can work as long as they want to. So how can we support older workers? Well, again, thinking of myself, you can either choose an age-friendly employer, or you can choose self-employment. And this is one of the reasons why a simple gift like this with Zoom, having captioning on the bottom, there are all kinds of tricks that we can use, technology that is available that people don't know about, that can make you just as productive behind a desk. You wouldn't necessarily know if I was in a wheelchair right now. You wouldn't necessarily know where I'm geographically loaded, where I am based on remote work. So there are many things that are, I think, changes in the workplace, the future of work, that is not only going to think of accessibility, diversity and inclusion and equity in the sense of social justice issues, but also disabilities, and also age fits in here well. If I'm 60 years old and I'm doing my job just as efficiently as the next person, it doesn't necessarily matter if I'm popular at the water cooler, or if I fit in well in going to the lunch crowd. So there are many ways that we can help support older workers, or ourselves as older workers, by creating an environment that works for us. Finally, one of the reasons, again, why I'm here today, and why Charles introduced us in this way, is that it's all about coaching, finding, it's about a shift in mindset for ourselves, recognizing that I do or do not want to work. On what terms do I want to work? What does that work look like? How am I going to sustain that? Is it based on my values? Is it that for years, I enjoyed being in 3 different countries, giving keynote talks in 3 different weeks. I don't enjoy that anymore. I would rather be more centrally based and have a community around me. So I've had to undergo a mindset. I've had to go through resilience in the sense that not everybody understands why I went from being this global person who's seen at multiple conferences and presenting with it, that I'm choosing to be a consultant and coach and be more a solopreneur. And then finally getting coaching to help you with accessibility, because the reality is some things change as we grow older. And so with all that in mind, where each step you take and the path that you plan is going to determine how you live, learn, and earn longer. Where some people may just be depleted and just be so content gardening. And some of you might be starting your 2nd or 3rd startup in your 60s and 70s. Everybody's different. But I guess I'll just close by saying, hopefully this talk, stimulated to you and raised your awareness so that you can make a plan, knowing that not all plans stick, but at least recognizing that you're likely to live longer. And if that's the case, you need to earn longer. And that itself means checking out your financial planner and then thinking about how you're going to get there, those steps. And then never be too proud to get support along the way. So on that, I'll thank you and then open it up for questions.
Thank you, Kelly. That was very interesting, and a lot of questions and thoughts come up. One of the questions that came up in the chat was around gender differences. And so in terms of careers and as people move on in both, how people approach 65 and gender differences. And I think also thinking about different types of careers that people are looking at.
Yeah, the statistics, when you break them out to men and women, well, certainly it's no surprise the longevity women on average, as I showed you, will, have a statistically significant increase in longevity. But the nature of jobs, the type of jobs that people do makes a difference. So if you chose to take a break early in your life to be to provide for the kids, or just to stay at home or work from home or something like that, certainly the need to learn and enter the workforce later in life is going to look different than a female who chose to continue working after a pregnancy and didn't leave the workforce. As far as aging goes, if you look at age-friendly careers, they tend to be conducive to both genders. So thinking about consultants, thinking about consultants always comes up, but the other one is financial planners, or is another popular one. For some, it's real estate agents or writers, copy editors, and things like that you can do independently, and they tend to be gender neutral. But so I don't know if that answers your question. Certainly, we can see that health comes into play, and here in longevity, and with COVID, the statistics are horrible when you look at the gender difference of the differential effect based on gender, because more women are in the service sector. So whether it's hospitality, restaurant serving, whether it's everything from hair salons, teachers and things like that. So the proportion of the population that are in white collar jobs that could easily transition, not easily, but could transition remotely, tended to be more males. So that's another example.
Okay, yeah, another one is, and this is related as well, I think, in the transition when people's kids leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. And sometimes, as someone was saying here, their kids are not, they're going to be close to 65 when their kids actually leave. But that transition point, which my daughter's going off to university this year, and is a time that a lot of people think about making a change, I think.
Yeah, and so many people hit that 50 mark. Or, one thing that's interesting about age, and which is unlike our parents' generation, is that I had my children, because I've been in school half my life, I had my children at 38 and 40. if you look at a typical 40-year-old, you'd think a stereotype of a 40-year-old, but in reality, some people like me were having my children. Some people at 40 were becoming empty nesters, right? And so what that looks like is very different depending on those milestones. And so this is also why we academics are moving beyond the younger life, middle-aged, and older life, thinking of it as being three periods in our lifetime. It's not anymore. There's no rules. Our lifestyles, we go through stages in life. And they may happen at different ages. And so thinking back to the empty nester, that empty nester might be a 60-year-old. Somebody might be becoming a grandmother at 40. So there's no formula. But what we can say is that maybe what we plan doesn't always necessarily come true. So we all know that when you become an empty nester, it's not uncommon for maybe kids to boomerang home and end up living in the basement for a little while. Or even at one point, we had 4 generations living in my house. My mother lives with us, and my nephew had to come live with us for a little bit when he needed knee surgery and had to take time off his job. So it's a little bit of a free-for-all, and there's no one predictable formula on how to navigate this, which is why I think getting some support really helps.
One question, and this comes up, I mean, part of the reason that these kind of age limits sometimes were put in place is that there's a sense that older people are taking up positions or roles within organizations and not sort of making way for younger people. And then related to that is maybe the way to describe the question is around, okay, well, how can younger generations and older generations in a way work cooperatively? Something I hear constantly, companies' biggest problem pre-pandemic was we can't find any workers. And now it seems even worse for many companies. So.
Right. Well, 2 answers. One is, you're right. Not everybody wants to work, but they may feel they have to work. And so I think it's equally important to support the employee to make that decision. One of the studies I saw came, and I'm just quoting it loosely, so I may be off a little bit, was that a cost to the company can be as much as $50,000 per year per employee who's kind of hanging on, right? So if you had the opportunity to work with that employee, they might be hanging on because they need it financially. They might be hanging on because they don't know what else to do, and they're kind of depressed at the idea of not having to go somewhere in the morning. But just think about how it's equally important to work with that individual to help them choose maybe that it's time to leave. It's best for them and it's best for the company. And if they only had a little support on what that would look like and created other opportunities to go to. So much of this is psychological. So much of this involves, emotions. It's mentally and emotionally loaded. So working with those employees to have them transition out at the appropriate time helps then feed younger people or people helps contribute to the cycle and turnover of a company as it should. The second part was multi-generations working together, and there's a lot of research out there about solutions and how that can work. Peter Capelli is one of the authors who's written books about how you can get multiple generations working together so that perhaps a leader who's in their 70s and is not comfortable with tech can actually end up with a co-creative position where they're collaborating and dividing up responsibilities in a way that can be really cohesive. So again, there are models out there if you're interested in looking for them.
And then another question on an issue that I know, I think you know well, around it can be really hard to get companies to even look and consider hiring older workers.
Yeah, ageism and discrimination is definitely out there. We all know people who, if you just put your resumes in Indeed or some of those, automated filters, there are whole classes that will tell you to take off dates, take off any type of cue that suggests that you might be, over 40, because, age discrimination exists. On the flip side, I'm working with a company right now that made the New York Times because the average age of the company is 57, and let's celebrate that. And they're and they're working on anti-ageism through marketing and things like that. So so maybe the pendulum will change, and if we are all in positions where we can influence change, we can lead by example.
Well, and we're coming up on our 1 hour, and there's so much more to discuss. It's such an interesting topic, and I know that, and you'll be giving, Imara is going to follow up with some resources, some of the books and resources that you mentioned. So, you know, and Imara is reminding me that there is one more Insights for Action webinar in a month from now, creating systemic change, integrating systems thinking and indigenous wisdom. Sounds like an interesting talk. One of the questions that came up was, does Royal Roads, you know, have age limits on students? And is Royal Roads also in their HR practices thinking about this? And I will say I would put my thing on the I don't know if Royal Roads, because I haven't really heard very much. They did create for faculty a special sort of transition out where you can work part-time and transition out. In terms of student ages, students of all ages. And I will say Kelly and I are actively talking about and open and interested, this part of we're interested to hear people's ideas and input on what types of education. Royal Roads is very much about, we want to create education, and we were created by the province really to address, you know, a professional workforce and people looking to reskill, looking to change their careers or develop their skills as they're on in the workforce. So that's really the purpose of the university. And Kelly and I are talking about ways that we can build education that would meet people's needs. And as I say, across our sample size of across the 50 people in our cohort that just went through the coaching program, there's a real interest. And I know a lot of my students after they graduate are really interested in continuing. I always pitch the idea that our degrees should be like a subscription service where you get a degree for life and you keep coming back. So we're going to find ways to make that happen and continue the education. So we will hear from you again, Kelly. And
thank you. And I put my email address in the chat room if anyone has any follow-up questions, because I realized I ran a little bit late, ran over.
Yeah, but thank you very much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at future episodes. And Kelly, as you saw, you can go to her website as well, and she has some resources there at Lindeneer. So thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.